Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now, today I'm honoured to be speaking with author, journalist and consultant Joan Ryan. Joan, welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Thanks so much, Dan. Glad to be here.
Really excited to have you on. Why don't we start by getting you to introduce yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience?
Well, I've been a sports journalist for many, many, many years. I don't need to put a number on it. And I was a sports columnist and then started writing some books. My first book, which some people may be familiar with, is Little Girls in Pretty Boxes, The Making and Breaking of Gymnasts and Figure Skaters, basically about the legal child abuse in those two sports. Which certainly has borne out, the evidence on how rampant that is. And now my fifth book is Intangibles, Unlocking the Science and Soul of Team Chemistry. And I have been a consultant, the media consultant for the San Francisco Giants baseball team. God, I can't believe it. This is the longest job I've ever had. I'm in my 13th year consulting with them. So I work with the players and do some strategic communications with the front office too. But most of the time I spend my time in the clubhouse, with the players and talking with them. And that certainly informed this latest book, Intangibles.
Well, that's the book that we're here to talk about. I've read it. I love it. It's brilliant. There's so many golden nuggets for coaches on the coaching side, and predominantly the psychological side. As you say, it's Intangibles, Unlocking the Science and Soul of Team Chemistry. And why the fascination with team chemistry, Joan? What's brought you to that subject?
Well, the whole time I was writing sports, I was never that, data-centric person. I was a columnist, but I was never the one, let's fire this coach. What is he doing? I always assumed that when a coach made a decision, he might be more informed than I am. And so that he's more likely to make the right decision than I would. And I come from a big family. I'm one of 6 kids, very tight-knit family. And I'm a total pack animal. I've always been. I was the third of the 6, and I'm a total pack animal. So, when I left Florida, where my family lives, and came to San Francisco, I was on my own, right? And I really missed my pack. I felt like a fish out of water. And one of the first teams that I was covering was the San Francisco Giants baseball team in the late 80s. And there was this, as I described them, this junk drawer jumble of a team of characters that really shouldn't fit together, and they'd fight and they'd get on each other and they'd joke and pull pranks. And I would stand there in the clubhouse sometimes and just long to be a part of them, that because they loved each other. You could tell they just loved each other and nobody had more fun. And so that's always stuck with me, just that longing for that pack. And that's what fascinated me the most about covering sports. It was the relationships among the players and what held them together, and whether that had any impact on what they did on the field. And that team that I was covering ended up winning the National League pennant and going to the World Series in 1989. And then 20 years later, and they didn't win, but it was the Earthquake World Series for anybody who follows baseball over there. And 20 years later, now I'm working for the Giants as their consultant, and I'm at the 20-year reunion of this fabulous 1989 weirdo team. And I'm walking through the party tent, and I'm telling you, you could see it in their eyes and hear it in their voices that they still loved each other. There was a connection there that was beyond just like, we shared an experience together. And 2 words kept coming up, which was team chemistry. in their conversations. And as I'm driving home that night, I kept thinking, we throw that term around so much, team chemistry. And I was thinking, God, I really don't know what that is exactly. Is it because they all have beards, or they have these, crazy handshakes, or they go out to dinner together? Like, really, what is it? And then how does it affect performance? Because why should we even be talking about team chemistry, right? Unless it affects performance. So that was 2009, and my book finally came out in 2020. I did write another book in the interim, but it took hold of me to just answer those questions. Does team chemistry really exist, or is it this myth? If it exists, what is it exactly, and how does it affect performance? And that has driven me for the last 10 years.
Well, given the level of detail that you go into in each chapter, I'm not surprised it took you over a decade. So, but I love the way you open the book in the introduction. You sort of pose a counter to the notion of team chemistry being a thing, because you spoke to some people. I mean, was it Michael Lewis, the author of Moneyball? I'm not too sure if I've got his name right, but it sounded like he snapped back and said doesn't exist, and then you spoke to a few other fairly prominent coaches who said no, it's about talent, it was a sort of a really refreshing way to start a book, because you pose this notion of, I might be wrong here, it might not be about chemistry.
Right. And so, the book is my journey. This is my very ambitious quest to sort of solve this mystery of what this is, and really challenge myself. Michael Lewis, huge fan of Michael Lewis, has written so many incredible books, and super smart guy. And so he just totally dismissed it out of hand when I told him, this was the book I was working on. He just said, doesn't exist, period, move on. And I thought, wow, okay, let me see if maybe he's right. And so, the next 270 pages are this journey of, going down this path. Well, is it about this? And, I talked to neuroscientists and organizational psychologists, sports psychologists, evolutionary biologists, really trying to find out, well, what is the foundation of these relationships we have that do seem to influence how we perform on the field, in our jobs, in whatever we do. Sports is certainly just one example of where team chemistry plays out into elevated performance. But we see it really in any group of people. We're, as you know better than anybody, Dan, we are tribal folk, aren't we? We are all about our tribes and how our brains evolved. And so that's what was so fascinating about this, as you well know.
And I want to move on to that tribal folk in a second, but it was interesting because as I was reading about your conversation with Michael Lewis, for me in my own mind, and drawing on the experiences in my career, especially when I've spoken to very data-driven, say, sports scientists who are incredible at what they do, I was thinking, well, yeah, Joan, of course this guy's saying this because, hey, he's written about Billy Beane and sabermetrics and spawned this incredible industry, and it's amazingly powerful, informative stuff. But I've always wondered if the filter we have as human beings shuts off passageways to certain things in life, details in life. So if I'm going to be really analytical over here, it's very, very difficult to be a people person over there. Although it's kind of disproved in chapter 3 when you talk about Brandon McCarthy, who we're going to come on to. But chapter 1, you lay out a little bit of science, almost a little bit of evolutionary science, for the foundations of chemistry, that humans are innately social creatures, as you said there. Part of who we are, or part of who they are a part of who we are. Do you want to explain that for me? Can you unpack that?
Yeah. When you look at evolution and you look at 3 million years of the human species evolving to who we are today, our brains grew at to a size that was disproportionate to our bodies compared to, other animals on Earth, right? So, why did it keep expanding? It was expanding to accommodate something, right? And our assumption is that it's all our intellect. Well, what really kept it growing was all the social wiring. We are alive today as a species because of our social wiring, perhaps even more than our intellectual wiring. Because of our size, we needed to depend on each other. We could not survive in isolation. We needed our tribes. And so our brains adapted to wire itself to drive us to not just to collaborate, but to be so committed to each other that we be willing to sacrifice ourselves for the tribe. Man, that is some strong wiring right there, right? So physiologically, what I didn't know was that physiologically we're dependent on each other. Our body rhythms, our hormones, how we have evolved to communicate to each other with just one twitch of a muscle in our face. We are brilliant at reading tone of voice and body language and our eyes and how we even evolved physiologically that, unlike you, as I'm looking at you, you have the whole bottom of your face is covered with hair, beards, everything. But, hair sort of appeared from our faces, from when we were apes, right? And we evolved so that we could see all these muscles. And we have, much more white in our eyes, the sclera, so we can better detect in another human being where your eyes are looking, right? So we can then look, okay, what's going on over there? And our vocal cords elongated so we can make much more nuanced, complex sounds so that everything we say has levels and levels and levels of meaning. So all of that evolved to make us creatures that are being influenced by one another every moment of every day. And our brains can, just constantly take in all of those signals that we don't even realize we're taking in. As I'm looking at you on Zoom today and recalibrate. So now I'm responding, directly to what my brain is perceiving in the signals these unspoken signals you're giving me. So we are just these brilliant communication machines that, are constantly influencing one another in so many ways.
My favourite little fact, if that's the right word, is this idea that when you see somebody, when you're walking down the street and you see somebody looking at something, like they're looking up into the trees or they're looking up into the skies, you're drawn to look up with them. And that's my understanding. Evolutionary scientists would say that's an evolutionary mechanism to allow us to survive, because they might be looking at something that's really important for our survival. So it's just incredible stuff. And I, as somebody who's a bit of a personality science junkie, I'm fascinated with this, because what a lot of people don't always realise is actually personality science. Our personality traits are drawn from our sociality. We are extroverted or introverted. We're agreeable or we're low agreeable. We're conscientious or we're low conscientious, because that's us trying to get along and get ahead with others. Our functioning within our society draws out our personality. So much of what we do is designed to get along and to get ahead with other people.
Mm-hmm. That's true. And so much of that, as you talk, all I'm thinking about is the word trust, right? I mean, everything about every relationship we have, whether it's with our dog, every relationship a human being has is based on trust. whether it's I don't trust you or I do trust you. But, and that is what, of course, team chemistry is all about, right? It is the foundation of it is trust. If I trust you and all those things that go into trust, and it's those signals we talked about, it's touch. Oh, meaningful touch, whether it's an arm around somebody's shoulder, your hand just, on their hand, releases that oxytocin in our brains that is, so-called the trust hormone or the love hormone, that when that's released into our bloodstream, we feel trust. It's like when you fall in love, your brain is, awash with oxytocin, right? You just feel this, physical connection, this, and that's what real trust feels like. Or when women are in labor, they tons of oxytocin. So that, given all that pain, when that baby lays on her chest, oh man, that is a bond in a moment that lasts a lifetime. So when you think about a team, right, they're all in the locker room in the clubhouse, and, some veteran comes up to a rookie who's just walked in, eyes open. And I always look at that face sometimes of a rookie walking in a major league locker room or a professional locker room for the first time. And it's almost like somebody a new prisoner walking out onto the, the prison yard. And it's like, oh my God, how am I going to survive here? So when that veteran comes over and, flings his arm around him and says, man, we are glad you're here. You're just the guy we need right now to inject this in us, and you're going to be great. We know what you did down in the minor leagues, and you're going to be great. Well, that kid's brain is now awash in oxytocin, and he's feeling connected to this veteran in a way he didn't before. And he's feeling like, okay, I can trust this guy. And when you trust, you feel trustworthy. So now you're ready to fill that role of being the trustworthy guy. And then, of course, across the clubhouse, there's another guy watching this happen, and his mirror neurons are firing. And our mirror neurons is that mimicking that we do to basically understand what's going on in your head without you telling me, right? I start to mimic maybe your facial expressions, your tone of voice, your thing. And so like if you start to grimace, you go like this, I almost automatically then go like this, which sends a signal to my brain, oh, he's worried, he's angry, he's annoyed, like what is going on? Because I have mimicked you. And so now this guy across the clubhouse is seeing this going on, and his mirror neurons fire. And so his brain releases oxytocin as if that interaction is happening to him. And when I read all about that, I thought, okay, that's how this chemistry, that's one of the ways this chemistry spreads, because we are just, we pick up on everything that's going on around us and have a physiological response to it.
Well, you've mentioned this magical word, trust. Trust has this biological marker, oxytocin, that you've spoken about there. And in chapter 2, I think the chapter is, the central idea is oxytocin. But you tell us this really interesting tale of a baseball player, Aubrey Huff, who perhaps, if I remember rightly, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't start off as the most social character, but eventually became that central social character. Tell me a bit about Aubrey Huff.
So Aubrey Huff was a veteran player when he arrived in the Giants clubhouse in 2010. And he was the guy who kind of, bounced from team to team, very disliked among his teammates because he had such horrible social skills. He was so arrogant, which was the balance, as we see all the time, right? The more insecure you are, the greater your swagger, when you walk into the room. And that was Aubrey Huff. He was the last to show up at the ballpark, the first to leave. He was kind of a complainer a bit. He could play, obviously, because people kept hiring him. But he was just kind of coarse and gross, and So he shows up in 2010 on a 1-year contract because the Giants couldn't find anybody else. Other attempts to fill that role fell through. Okay, well, let's just go with Aubrey Huff because he can swing a bat. But the Giants at that time had a lot of young players and really nice guys. I mean, it was just a group of really nice guys. And Aubrey Huff walks into this, and he's a veteran, and he has some charisma. He can be funny, but he's, as I call locker room funny, like not like out in the rest of the world funny,
Right.
but stuff that's funny in a locker room may not be funny. But anyway, he walks in and he has this charisma, and these young players assume that, oh man, he knows a lot of stuff and he's kind of fun and he's funny and he's making us laugh. And they don't know anything about his background, right? They didn't bother. He's just off the scrap heap. So, long story short, the culture that Aubrey Huff walked into was this culture that was ready to embrace him, ready to assume trust, that he was somebody to be trusted. And therefore, as I made reference to before, therefore, he began to be trustworthy. He actually filled the role that all these guys thought he was. It's like that old saying, I want to be as great as my dog thinks I am, and it was like that for Aubrey Huff. And he became, in that clubhouse for that 1 year in which the Giants won their first World Series since they moved to San Francisco in 1958, he became a leader. He had never been within a mile of being a leader on any other team. But his teammates, the culture, reshaped him in this very profound way. And that's why I wrote that chapter, because I was not a fan of Aubrey Huff at all. And I kept going back to the players on that team to say, okay, are you sure he was the leader on that team? Because if he was, I got to write about that, because it was such a profound transformation. And he was never that way again, ever again, even though he was with the team for 2 more years. He wasn't that guy again. It was just that moment in time. And I found that incredibly fascinating, of how profoundly powerful a culture can be on the people in it.
That's really interesting you said that. So when he left the Giants, he went back to the same old Aubrey Huff that he was before?
He was even still with the Giants and went back to the same old Aubrey Huff. It was that team in that season. Now, he had many, many problems afterward. I think the fame that he got from being on that World Series team, he was changed by the attention and the fame, as were, a few other players on that team. So even though it was a lot of the same players coming back in 2011, they're not the same players. And that's when people say, well, how could they not have been as good? They have basically the same players. It's like, no, they come back, they're not the same players, even though they're the same. They have the same names and are wearing the same uniform. That experience of winning a World Series for the first time in a city that hasn't seen one changes who a lot of those people were. And certainly Aubrey Huff just kind of went off the rails. He had a drinking problem, and he wrote a book about it. He had a drinking problem, he had a drug problem, he had some mental health issues. And they all just, rocketed to the surface after that World Series victory.
Now, in that chapter, you push and promote the influence, the impact, the importance of oxytocin. And then you pose the question, well, where's testosterone in all of this? Because testosterone is, I guess, regarded as your high performance hormone, your legal drug,
Right.
driving performance, right? And you question that, but then I think in your research you found something interesting about the link between testosterone, oxytocin, and behavior.
Right. Well, one of the things I never knew about testosterone was that it also works as a hormone that drives one's desire or ambition to be a leader, right? To be the top dog on this, in this group, right?
For stature.
For stature. So that, when we think about Aubrey Huff, and we think about him, never being a leader, but coursing with testosterone, this guy, right? But within that culture, testosterone worked also as that desire for stature, to be respected. So it wasn't just, I want to rule the roost. It was, I want to be who these guys think I am, and to be at that top level. And what testosterone also does, and I use this analogy of the arrow leaf plant, that when it's planted on soil, its leaves bloom in one shape, in shallow water, another shape, and in water, yet a third shape. And so it shows, what does our environment, how much does our environment work? So with Aubrey Huff was like an arrow leaf, right? In that clubhouse, with that testosterone coursing through and climbing up, wanting to have stature, he had to behave in a way that group would admire and respect. So instead of being an idiot, instead of arriving late at the ballpark, to get that stature, he was going to have to arrive early. He was going to have to be supportive of his teammates. And he did it all naturally without actually making a conscious choice. But part of what testosterone was doing for him was making him into the person that his teammates already thought he was.
It's interesting, Joan, because one of the things you lay out in the book, and drawing a broad brush statement here, but you suggest that the historical culture within baseball can be one of suspicion. It can be one of individuality. Players, not all the time clearly, lots of individual differences, lots of differences across teams, but they can be suspicious, they can look over their shoulder and be not have the trust and be more concerned about others. And you just wonder the experiences of Aubrey Huff going into being at the Giants, and how his high testosterone levels, this competitor, had been in these environments where there was a lack of trust, possibly, and so his testosterone fueled him towards a kind of mindset and the kind of behaviours that would drive individuality. Whereas what I hear you say, and what I read, was that because he stepped into this culture of camaraderie, culture of caring, this loving group, if you like, consciously or subconsciously, he's looked around and as I say, consciously or subconsciously, he's gone, well, I've actually got to go towards the group here. I've got to go towards these group values of inclusivity and caring. And that's what he did.
It feels good, right? I mean, there is a singular pleasure in being part of a unified team. And I'm not sure Aubrey Huff, since he left college, had ever experienced that. As you said, there is almost this, the opposite of trust isn't distrust. It's like paranoia. It's this organized paranoia, right? I don't trust anybody. So therefore, I'm paranoid. Are they talking about me? Are they thinking this? What's going on? And the moment that you could almost see it happen with Aubrey Huff in that season. He was this kind of lumbering runner on the bases. He's kind of a big guy, and he not fast at all. He hits a ball into right field, rounds first base, and the ball rattles around in the corner, goes around second, heading to third, and he's already, because he was never in good shape. He had a little bit of a pop belly, and he is huffing and puffing and dying, and the third base coach is waving him to home. Now, for those of you who don't know baseball, an inside the park home run is very unusual, because you got to get around all the bases before somebody throws the ball into home plate. It very rarely happens, especially not somebody like Aubrey Huff, right? It's usually a speedster. So his eyes get like saucers when he sees the third base coach waving him in. It's like, are you kidding me? And he huffs, as somebody described it, it's like a runaway beer truck, getting to home plate. And he goes there, and his teammates, this is fairly early in the season, his teammates are howling from the dugout and jumping up and down and thinking this is the greatest thing they've ever seen. He goes to the dugout, plops down on the bench, and he can barely breathe. And his teammates come over with water and with they're waving a towel to wave him off, and they're laughing and he's laughing. And you could just almost see the oxytocin spreading through his brain in response to all this love he's getting. And in the clubhouse, of course, every sports highlight is showing this guy, huffing around the bases. And his teammates are, playing it over and over and over again. And nobody's laughing harder than Aubrey Huff. So instead of being on the outside looking in, oh man, are they making fun of me? What does this mean? He is, ragging on himself more than anybody else. And you could just tell that in a way was the moment that he really became a part of the team and had committed to the team.
It's so funny, I'm thinking as I'm listening to you speak and I'm reflecting on what we're talking about, I'm thinking about social identity, the identity of the group, and drawing players into a strong identity. Our identity is caring, it's valuing each other, it's having great relationships. And it's interesting, if we go back to your introduction and the conversation you had with the coach, and you can remind me who he was, if you don't mind, who said, no, this is just about talent. This is just, and I think you drew out of him actually, perhaps some contradictions there, but don't you think that therefore it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy? Because if that coach is saying, well, it's just about talent, and he's in charge of that organisation, he acts like that, his players probably feed off that, so it becomes very much an individualistic culture, an individualistic pursuit. So anybody comes in just reinforces this notion of, oh, it's about talent, because there's no effort of creating a social identity around relationship.
Right. No, that's a really good point. It's like Einstein said, we measure what we think we should measure. We don't, I'm not saying that correctly, but what I mean. We're selective in what we put our emphasis on, right? And as you said, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yep.
Around that. So you're right. If I look at somebody's numbers, he's batting, 355, or, he's batting 242, or somebody, like, are you just going to go through the data of each one of your players and do a lineup just based on where his numbers today, like the stock market, right? Nobody actually does that, because no matter how much you respect the data, and we all do, obviously, it's incredibly important. You don't just go by those numbers, because why would you need a manager? It's like, why do we need judges in a courtroom? Why can't we just look up, oh, well, you did this and here's your sentence? No, because human nature is so nuanced. We all get it, whether we acknowledge it or not. And so that Jim Leland, who was the manager of the Pittsburgh Pirates at the time, and I was sitting in his office, while he's chain smoking his Marlboros, never without them. And, great guy. But it's like, that's BS. Just give me the 9 most talented guys. I'm going to put them out there. But then, as you referenced, he shifted to say, well, nothing's more valuable than a veteran presence. You have some good veterans in that clubhouse. That makes the biggest difference you want. And I said, gosh, that sounds like something other than the data influences performance. Like, you're recognizing that performance can come from someplace other than, how he's swinging the bat. And that is going to help them swing the bat, in a different way. So team chemistry, there's so many assumptions about what it is and what it isn't. And so I think Jim Leland and some of these other people who dismiss it are thinking that team chemistry is about going to dinner together and everybody liking each other. And it's like, no, you can have, as you know, we call 25 players, 25 cabs teams, meaning when the game is over, 25 guys don't want to see each other. They're out and they're all taking the cabs back to the hotel by themselves. And you can win like that for sure, because comes back to trust again. Maybe you don't trust them as, you know, human beings, but you trust them as teammates. So when you get on that field, you have incredible trust and you have incredible team chemistry, but it's what I call task chemistry, right? It still is about trust, but I trust that you care as much about winning as I do. I trust that you've put in the time to prepare yourself. I trust that you'll sacrifice your own body to make a play that we need. And it's incredible trust. So, you know, teams that don't like each other can have incredible team chemistry too.
It's so fascinating, you know, Joan, as you're speaking there, the Jim Leyland scenario. I could think of two funky terms for it. It's in psychology we call it heuristic biases, so thinking biases essentially, and we just constantly look for reinforcement around our thinking biases. It makes us feel better. And the other term is actually inattentional blindness. Have you ever seen the gorilla experiment where you got the basketball players throwing the balls and you've got to count the number of passes, and the gorilla passes through the middle of the group and you don't see it? Have you ever seen that?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what it is. That basically the team chemistry for Jim Leyland is the gorilla, essentially, and he's just looking at the passes, and the passes is the talent, basically.
I love that. I'm going to steal that, Dan. That is fantastic.
Steal away. It's inattentional blindness is classic, and it's lots of our personality as well. Anyway, I could bore you on that all day long, but a neat segue actually, because you talked about the definition of team chemistry and measurement and things like that, and moving on to chapter 3, which is entitled Super Carriers, and this former baseball player, Brandon McCarthy, who sounds like somebody who's, you know, overwhelmingly intelligent and is a real stats geek, really loves the stats side. However, he's one person who is robust, who does flex and understands the importance of chemistry. And you talk about a conference where he was speaking and he was asked about essentially chemistry, and he said, yes, I love the stats, but I think it's important. And the reason I think it's important is because of Johnny Gomez. Tell us about Johnny Gomez.
So Johnny Gomes was a journeyman player.
Gomes, you know, not Gomez. Sorry. Gomes, yeah. Gomes
was a journeyman player, meaning like he had a low career batting average. You know, bounced from team to team because he just wasn't good enough, you know, to stay. But a pattern did emerge over his career, which was that his teams always seemed to win. And so Brandon McCarthy played with him on the Oakland A's. And he saw up close, and I like that, you know, you called, you know, Brandon McCarthy's thinking was, you know, robust, and he was open to another point of view on this. He was smart enough to be curious about the impact this Johnny Gomes seemed to be having on the team. And his one season with Johnny Gomes changed his point of view. That team chemistry, he couldn't define team chemistry, but he knew it existed because he had been in the clubhouse with Johnny Gomes. And Johnny Gomes is what I ended up calling a super carrier of chemistry. So his performance didn't have as much of an impact on the team as his presence. And part of what his presence was an absolute unconditional belief and commitment to his teammates. He'd go and he saw everything that was going on in the clubhouse, and he'd go up to a guy and, you know, what's going on? I saw this was going on. Let's go look at the video together. And he'd be out on the field, and always giving 100%, always helping his teammates out, to the point where this was the most amazing example to me of team chemistry and how belief, and you know this better than I do, Dan, how much belief can affect what your body does, right? And you know golf, you play golf and coach, the yips, right? That if you get it in your head, you can't make this putt, you can't make that putt, and all of a sudden your body just won't go with you. Well, the opposite can also be true, that if you really believe that this guy, Johnny Gomes, makes your team better, and just his presence on the team makes you better, guess what? It seems to happen. So anyway, it's the 2013 World Series with the Red Sox playing the St. Louis Cardinals. A World Series is a 7-game series. The Red Sox are down 2-1. They're going into game 4. They got to win game 4, because if you go down 3-1, you have a very low percentage chance of winning, right? The other team just has to win one more game. It's over. They win the championship. So the Red Sox, Johnny Gomes is on the Red Sox. He hasn't had a hit the entire World Series. I think he had like maybe 2 hits in the entire postseason. He's not playing well. And, because of the pitching matchup, he wasn't in the lineup. It was that left-right thing. He wasn't in the lineup. So the power structure of the players in the clubhouse, the leaders of the clubhouse, see that he's not in the lineup. And now with social media, the lineup goes out to the entire country already, and you don't change the lineup unless somebody's hurt. Those guys go into the manager and say, you got to change the lineup. We want Johnny Gomes in the lineup. Of course, the manager's looking at him like they got 3 heads. What are you talking about? Number one, I make the lineup, not you. And number 2, Johnny Gomes can't, hit the broadside of a barn right now. And they said, we play better with Johnny Gomes out there with us. They basically staged a mutiny. And this was never in the press. It was told it was in the book. It was never in the press. Nobody ever knew about it. And the manager changes the lineup. All of a sudden, the right fielder comes down with lower back tightness. And Johnny Gomes goes out there. And sure enough, he hits a 3-run homer to put them ahead. They stay ahead. They win that game and go on to win the World Series. And it's not that Johnny Gomes came through in that game, because I think that kind of is coincidence, but the fact that his teammates believed so utterly that he would help them win if he were out on the field with him. And it came to pass that is what happened.
Placebo
effect. It's just like in medicine, that there's a part of your brain, and it's psychological, but it's also biological, meaning that if you believe this painkiller is going to ease your pain, there's a part of your brain, that's in charge of, sending those healing, chemicals down to that place. They fire, right? They actually are firing. So you believe it and your brain is firing. So the same thing with Johnny Gomes, like your brain is firing in feeling like, oh my God, we're indestructible. We're unbeatable right now. And it goes to what one player told me, which sort of crystallizes all of this, that says, yes, they're already giving 100%, right? They're out on the field, they're giving 100%. So why does team chemistry matter, right? You literally can't give more than 100%. And this one player, Jake Peavy, says to me, he says, my teammates bring out a fight in me I can't willingly summon for myself. So that indicates, like, somebody like Johnny Gomes, when he's out there with those guys, he is helping them because they believe in him so much. He is summoning from them an effort, a focus, whatever it is, that they can't summon on their own.
It's fascinating, and I'm going to throw another psych term at you, which is you've brought to my mind. It's a term, embodied cognition, and as the name suggests, embodied, so embodiment, the body, cognition, mental process. So mental processes within our body. There's increasing evidence that the experience we have of living in our bodies influences what we see, what we experience in our outside world. And so I would just wonder, and it's a raving hypothesis, I suppose, but I just wonder if Johnny Gomes and players like that, when they help us feel good, and where do we feel good? We don't feel good in our head, do we, really? We feel good in our body. We experience that feel-good sensation in our body, in the pit of our stomach, or in our chest, or that warm feeling, or whatever it is. When we feel good in our body, it's embodied, then it gives us a chance to, we experience feeling good, and so we can play good. And I just wonder if there's a link there.
Totally a link there. It's that challenge versus threat, right?
Absolutely.
Think about Johnny Gomes when they have Johnny Gomes now, okay, they're under the gun. They got to win this game. But now they're looking at it as a challenge rather than a threat. It's, the fight or flight. They're ready to fight. And when we feel that way, our brains, when we look at something like, okay, these guys have my back, no matter what, so I'm not going to be afraid, right? Because no matter what happens, I'm still going to be part of the tribe. And I know together, we're going to do this. We're totally going to do this. And guess what happens? If you approach it by challenge, your blood vessels open, right? So now your heart's pumping. But just like if you're feeling afraid, now you're facing this challenge, your heart's pumping, but now your bloodstream is going. They're sending that blood up to your brain. They're sending it to, everywhere. Now, if you face it as a threat, you go into this sort of, virtual crouch. And now your body, your heart's still pumping, but your blood vessels constrict. Because it's saving all of that blood for your torso to, hold it all there. Because we're just crouching for the blow. We're ready for that blow. So you're right. I mean, your body is totally responding, and you're feeling like, I can't wait to get out on the field. I can't wait to tackle this challenge here. And what a difference it makes to performance, right? You're relaxed, you're excited, rather than like, oh God, it's going to happen. When is it going to happen?
Well, it's really interesting. You're talking about challenge versus threat, because you'll be interested to hear that in episode 71 of the Sports Psych Show, I spoke to Dr. Jamie Barker, who's done a lot of research. He's at Loughborough University in the UK, done a lot of research on challenge versus threat state. And the three sources of challenge or threat is self-belief, self-efficacy as we'd call it, but self-belief, the feeling of self-belief, a feeling of control, so I feel in control, so Johnny Gomes is on our team, that drives self-belief, a feeling of being in control, and a feeling of an approach state, working towards our goal rather than away from our goal. Rather than, I don't want to lose this, it's, hey, we're out here to win, we're out here to perform, we're out here to play well. And interestingly, the latest research coming out from Staffordshire University, on episode 52, we had Dr. Matt Slater, who does a lot of work in social identity theory, and there's an increasing link between social identity and challenge and threat, and how strong social identity can aid a challenge state.
Totally. And it's like, it's like in the military too, right? That who you are around is way more important to your performance than what you're fighting for. So even if you're saying, I want that World Series trophy, I want all of that. You already have, that whoever you put on the field is going to have that. But it's who are you surrounded by? Is there 100% trust? with that, that's going to affect your performance way more than any sort of noble purpose. That's like any soldier on a battlefield, right? It's not about God and country once those bullets are flying, right? It's about that guy next to me. And I'm willing to die for that guy. Circling back to what we said about, why did we become tribes to begin with? You had to be so committed to your tribe that you would be willing to sacrifice yourself for them. And that is still exactly how our brains work. And a version of that is in sports, in any organization. Your commitment to purpose becomes synonymous with your commitment to each other, so that your purpose really is each other, that we're all in this together. And it's, I call them just us teams, it's just us. These people in this moment with this purpose, we're the only people that can pull this off. And boy, do you feel pretty good and pretty strong if that's your social identity, right?
Now, like everything in life, there's always nuance. And in chapter 4, you talk about nuanced people, I suppose, or people who are certainly on the edge of certain personality traits. Mm-hmm. Your low agreeable people, slightly, I suppose, socially aggressive. Chapter 4 is about super disruptors, and you talk about principally Barry Bonds, but also Jeff Kent, who you got to spend time with both of them. And it's interesting because the chapter, it's not obvious, it's not straightforward in as much as your findings are not what people might necessarily think. So talk to us a little bit about Barry Bonds and Jeff Kent and super disruptors.
Well, after the chapter on my super carrier, Johnny Gomes, I said, well, of course, there are super disruptors, the opposite of that. And, number one in everybody's, hit parade was Barry Bonds, the very caustic, very isolationist Barry Bonds, very difficult to deal with. So in my mind, and I covered him, at the Giants. So, I was in those clubhouses. I saw how he behaved. And, I was always afraid to go up to him. And so he was my guy, my super disruptor. He was going to be my Johnny Gomes, right? So I'm building this whole chapter around, how Barry Bonds, hurt the performance of the Giants when he was on the team. Because in my mind, they didn't win a whole lot, right? They never won a World Series, whatever. And he's the best player in baseball. Only to find, as I do my research, interviewing all of his teammates and going back and really looking at the records of those teams, he wasn't a super disruptor at all. As big of a jerk as he was, as much as, the whole media couldn't stand him and he hated the media and, he lorded over that clubhouse, like the emperor, he didn't affect team chemistry. And one reason, there's a lot of reasons, but one was, he was like Steve Jobs, just sort of this guy that, just had no social skills and was awful and said the worst things to people. But he was such a savant at what he did that he offered so much to the productivity of Apple and Barry Bonds, to the productivity of those Giants teams, that it's like, okay, you can put up with them. And also their personalities they were like, they were on that island of misfit toys all by themselves. So the rest of the team could have great chemistry. And Barry was Barry. He was over there and you just said, well, I'm glad he's on our team. I'm glad he's hitting those home runs for us. So now, could he have elevated the performance of those other guys had he been a different personality? Yes. He could have amplified that talent of the rest of the team more than he did. But he also didn't destroy it. He didn't bring them down. Those teams were great teams. So he wasn't my disruptor. So what I did find that if you're a superstar player, it's almost impossible to be a super disruptor because you add so much to the performance. So then I thought, well, who are the super disruptors? And really who they are, you talk to anybody on a team and they will tell you this. It's the complainers who are looking for recruits, right? I can't believe they're not playing me. I'm way better than that guy, or he's getting paid more than me. And then go to their teammates and said, and you're getting screwed too. And here's the 6 ways you're getting screwed. So now you've got this little group of guys who are all complaining, and that just drains the energy out of the team because the rest of the team are spending their time complaining about the complainers. And so nobody's really focusing on what they should be doing, right? It's like a slow leak. And then the other super disruptor is the malingerer, the guy that, never puts in quite enough work, before the game, the guy that wants to take a day off, sit on the bench on the day the best pitcher for the opponent is on the mound. Yeah, I think I need a day off just to relax, right? Because you're not going to get a hit off that guy. And everybody on the team knows that's why you're sitting out, is because you're afraid to face that guy. Those are the guys you got to get rid of. Those 2 guys can be just a toxin in the clubhouse.
Or you've got to be a very good coach to be able to find a way to help them.
Yeah, it can happen, but it's tough to turn those guys around. And you'll also find that they're generally that guy on every team they're on, because it is almost a personality type. Or you're a fading veteran. Fading veterans can be really tough on a team because they think they should still be playing. They don't really have it yet, and they can't accept that they're on the downside of their career.
One concept in this chapter that was absolutely fascinating to me, and I've never come across it before, was research from Kate Buzrakova and Chester Spell at Rutgers University about workplace fault lines, which I just thought was fascinating. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It is fascinating, and it works to a certain extent on teams, although I think it may be more so in business, but perhaps not. But fault lines are those subcultures. So we have a culture of a team, and then, like, if I'm just going to be using baseball for instance, you have a lot of Latin American players, and they're from different countries. They're from Venezuela, they're from Puerto Rico, they're from the Dominican Republic, wherever. So there's those subcultures. Then you have Southern white players coming from, Alabama and Tennessee, who might have a different point of view on, race relations, on politics, on whatever. Then you have a shrinking population of African American players. They're, like the Giants right now have 0 African American players on their main roster right now. They did have 1. So anyway, you have these fall, and then you have the veterans, and you have the rookies. So there's all these groups that kind of fall together. And so if you have a business or a group where those guys are just all in little cliques, and you don't have a lot of crossover in those groups, you really can have a very fractured clubhouse because, they're all maybe complaining about that other group or, all kinds of reasons. So, you need those players who's a veteran and from the Dominican Republic, and he plays infield. So you want him to be able to cross the line to the infielders, cross the line to the Latin American players, and because he's a veteran, you're crossing the line to other veterans. So you're not just sticking with your Dominican Republic, players.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what that is, what they're talking about.
I think it's really interesting because I think certainly in the UK we get nervous. We'll use the term cliques. There's a clique in the group, and there's a couple of cliques, and I think with good reason we get nervous. I think at the same time what that research is possibly stating, whether it's more relevant for business, as you say, we're not sure, but I also don't think we should be scared of it because, as you say, players come from their own macro systems. So your Latin American players who grew up in a certain culture will orientate themselves to others who had those experiences within their macro system. Yeah. And I think that's okay. That's fine. But as you say, what a team need are players who can cross those fault lines. So it was interesting.
But one of the more interesting things is, and you kind of alluded to it, is that these small groups are really essential because that's where your comfort is going to come from. That's where your real support is going to come from. So if you have a group of Dominican players, and something's going off on somebody's life, they know they can go to, these two other guys from the Dominican, and they're going to understand where you're coming from. They're going to understand your culture. They're going to understand that, your mom is sick back there, and, what are we going to do about it? Or, you're in a slump and you don't want to be vulnerable to the rest of the team, but you can be vulnerable with your subgroup there. And they were saying that you never want to break up the subgroups. You just want to have a lot of cross-pollination among all of them.
I like that idea of, I suppose, leaving a subgroup B, leaving a clique B, because it's their opportunity or their environment to express vulnerability.
Right, exactly. It's a safe place, and everybody needs their safe place.
Now, I want to finish off by talking about Chapter 4 and your 7 archetypes that you can actually take me through. They are Spark Plug, Sage, Kid, Enforcer, Buddy, Warrior, Jester. So I assume these are archetypes that can reinforce chemistry. Would I be right in saying that?
Yeah. And what I found was, and this is the only chapter in the book that is based on absolutely no science whatsoever. This is observation from me. I started with a list of about 22, different personality types that, you probably should have. Like I was looking at, how do you build chemistry? And I was kind of looking at it as a periodic table, like what are all the elements you need? And then cross, and it's like, no, it doesn't work that way at all. So I just went by my own observation and then running these lists by a ton of people in sports and even in business too, to come up with these 7. And what I found was, or my theory is, and this kind of goes back to Aubrey Huff and even Johnny Gomes to a certain extent, is that when you have a team that's starting to have good chemistry and that's forging, that great culture, these archetypes seem to manifest themselves. It's almost as if the group summons these archetypes from the people they have in it. So anyway, you have the sage, who is, grandpa. And I'm talking about men. I say guys all the time, but I mean male and female athletes.
Yeah, of course.
So forgive that. But so you have the sage who he's seen it all, done it all. He knows that, he's got wisdom and, he is a safe place to go. No judgment. Something's going on. Hey kid, come on over here. I'm going to make it well. And then you have the kid who's the rookie who comes in, and after he kind of gets over the whole, prison yard feeling of panic, is so excited to be there. This is what he's dreamt his whole life. And you go into a big league locker room and you're like, oh my God, there's an espresso machine in the dining room. Like you're just excited about everything. And so all the rest of the guys in that clubhouse are thinking, oh yeah, I remember feeling that way. This is why we love this game. So that kid energy is so important. The spark plug is the guy that, rallies the troops, has great timing, has just the right thing to say and the energy to say it. And it's like, come on, guys, who just believes it 100%, makes everybody else believe it. The warrior is sort of the Barry Bonds or, that player that you have on your team that's almost your icon, almost your logo, that you just say, he represents, our ferocity and our competitiveness. And as long as we have him on the team, we always have a chance to win. The buddy is the nobody eats alone guy. Come on, we're all going out to dinner, so it's the guy that maybe is that singleton. He's the only one from the Dominican Republic, and he doesn't have his group. And so, like, nobody's by himself, come on, you're in the tribe, here, let's go. And then the enforcer is, we don't do it like that here. Goes up to somebody and makes sure, like, hey, you know what, we run out, every ground ball of the infield. We work out, we help our team, whatever it is. This is how we do things here. And then the jester, who I think is the most powerful, a really great, smart jester, can be the most powerful player on that team. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One is, again, timing is everything. When the pressure is highest and the tension, you can cut it with a knife, the jester can do something, say something that breaks that tension. And we can relax. And obviously you have to be relaxed to perform at your best, right? So he can make everybody laugh, but even more important, what the jester can do, unlike the enforcer, who can be kind of a little bit of a jerk, he can be annoying, the enforcer, and everybody's like, God, just let it go. But they'll say, yeah, but he's right. We hate hearing it, but he's right. What the jester can do, he could send the sharpest criticism, feedback to a teammate, but wrapped in humor, it lands a different way. That teammate gets the message that you better, get your act together because you're embarrassing us and yourself. But he never feels humiliated, never feels like he's on the outside of the tribe and has to earn his way back in. He's part of the tribe, but the jester can deliver that message in a way that is really powerful without ostracizing anybody. So if you have that really intelligent jester on your team, you've really got something.
I agree, and I just think in the last 3 or 4 minutes taking us through those 7 archetypes, you've eloquently demonstrated that whilst science is useful, perhaps important, it's not everything. And these experiential personality types, if you like, I absolutely agree. They're drivers of team chemistry. They're drivers of organizational chemistry. Another word that's coming to mind is the tone of the organization, the tone of the team. And you will have experienced this when you walk into the room. It might be the dining room. I don't know. It might be the medical center, where it is. There's just something you get a feel. There's a tone. There's a chemistry, and I definitely recognise all of those types, if that's the term we want to use. In teams I've worked with, I think it's fascinating. At the end of the book, you close on what I know now. So to wrap things up, Joan, what do you know now?
God, there is so much. I mean, over 10 years, my goodness, I know that team chemistry is real. And, all those data-driven people who say, well, if you can't measure it, how do you know it's real? And my question always is, well, do you love your wife? Do you love your husband? Do you love your children? Yeah. Well, okay, put a number on it. Of course it's real. Just because you can't measure it doesn't mean it's not real. It just means you can't measure it. So I know team chemistry is real. I know that team chemistry's sole function is to elevate performance. That's its only function. And it's not camaraderie. Camaraderie is a state of being, cohesion, is a state of being. Chemistry is an action. It's an active thing. If your group does not improve its performance, it doesn't mean that your team wins, it just means that your team has improved its performance, you don't have chemistry. You have camaraderie or you have cohesion. And there's nothing wrong with them, but it doesn't move the needle. It just means it's more pleasant to go to work day to day. So that is team chemistry, that it's active. And what else do I know now? That most of the universe and our lives is driven by hidden forces, right? It's gravity, it's light waves, it's love, it's feelings. We can't see them with our eyes, right? And so that dismissiveness of team chemistry and the lack of curiosity, even like from a Michael Lewis, about what this might be, is so puzzling to me, especially since he wrote that book on the, heuristics of Kahneman and Tversky, right? The Undoing Project. It's like, well, what did he think that was about, if not the chemistry between these two brilliant men, right? They elevated each other's thinking. So, it's all these invisible forces in our lives, and team chemistry is one of them. And I know that I've scratched the surface in my 279 pages or whatever it is. And, I can't wait for somebody to write the next book and the next book and the next book and the next book that helps us understand it even more. Because a study of team chemistry is basically a study of human nature. And it's endlessly fascinating.
Well, what's fascinating, listening to you there and talking about the invisible forces, takes me back to episode number 84. I interviewed Steve Magnus. Dr. Steve Magnus is a wonderful athletic trainer at Houston University and sports scientist. And he talked about the uncomfortable relationship that science has with feelings, and this notion of if you can't measure it, well, should we actually be paying attention to it? And I think you've eloquently described today that how we should be and why we should be, and as you said, 270 pages, it's packed full. And you've scratched the surface in your 270 pages, but we've scratched the surface in the hour and 10 minutes that we've been speaking about your book. There's so much great content in there, Joan, and I thank you so much for your time. I know that you would have tapped the interest in our listeners. So how can they, you're on social media, what's your social media handles? How can they get hold of the book? If you want to be discovered, how can they discover you, or how can they contact you?
Several ways. My website is Joan Ryan Inc. .com, and my Twitter is @Joan Ryan. I know there's a lot of people in the UK who think it's the MP Joan Ryan, because I get a lot of tweets for her, and I try to say, no, it's a different
You
Joan
get a
Ryan.
lot of abuse, a verbal volley of abuse.
Yeah. And so if you go to my website, you can order the book, and you can also email me through the website. My email is joanryan1, the number 1 @gmail.com. And the book is out in the UK. There's a UK version, even though I have never been sent one. I guess I need to order it myself, but I love the cover of the UK edition. Do you have that one?
I've got the one that was a generous gift from you, if you recall.
That's right. You got the American version. So, I love the UK version. And so, it was so nice for them to publish it over there. So support the publisher of the UK version of Intangibles, and let's sell them a few books.
Fantastic. Well, look, Joan, it's been an absolute delight. Thank you so much for coming on, and so much fantastic information for coaches. There's real gold dust there. So thank you very much, Joan.
All right. Thanks, Dan. This was a blast.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me exactly what you think of the Sports Site show, and if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.